All right, so we're going to look at one of the examples of the use of the word slave, and this is between Jacob and Esau as they were reunited. If you read back in Genesis, earlier in Genesis, a couple chapters earlier, you see that Jacob, when he was younger, he basically he got Esau for his birthright and the blessing that goes with being the firstborn, which they kind of go hand in hand. But Esau complains about losing them both. So what you see here is them being reunited, and basically after Jacob scammed him, and according to Esau, after Jacob scammed him out of his birthright and his blessing, he wanted to kill Jacob. So Jacob fled and went to another land. Jacob hears, after many years, he hears that Esau is returning, and he's worried that Esau is going to still wants to kill him. And this is where you pick up in Genesis 33. Now, these little designations next to the words, I don't want to touch the designation itself, but right next to Jacob, that H3290, that designation is that is for the word Jacob. So anytime you see a designation after a word, it tells you that the Strong's Concordance designation for that word. And if you click that, it'll show you all of the verses in the Bible where that word exists. So if I click that H3290, it'll show me all of the verses where the word Jacob is listed. So now our designation is for the word servant, and I'll point it out when we get there. So I'm just going to read this. Bear with me. What I really want to get to is in like verse 17, but I want to start in verse 1 for context. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with him 400 men. And he divided the children unto Leah and unto Rachel and unto the two handmaids. Now, it's going to say he a lot, and it doesn't say who, but basically this here is Jacob dividing up his children with their moms. Verse 2. And he, Jacob, put the handmaids and their children foremost. The handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. And he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. So he kind of put them in kind of like a parade type of formation, and he went over to Esau before them. And he went there first in a pose of a demonstration of submission. And he went over first in case Esau attacked him, his family can run off. Which is, that's why he put the handmaidens first, closest to Esau, and he put Rachel and Joseph, his favorites, at the further end, so that basically if Esau would attack him, he would attack Rachel and her kid and Joseph last. You know, that's kind of a tangent, but that's what's going on here. So he passed over before them, bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother Esau. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children. This is Esau speaking. Who are these with thee? And he said, the children which God has graciously given thy servant. So Esau sees the children, he sees the parade of people, and he's like, who are these people? And Jacob replied, the children which God has graciously given thy slave. That is the word there used at the end of verse 5, where it says servant. That designation, H5650, that is the Hebrew word was used there for slave. They translated it servant because of the context, because of the connotations, I guess, that people think of slavery. So they translated it servant. But the Hebrew word there is slave. Verse 6, and the handmaidens came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Leah also with her children came near and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near Rachel, and they bowed themselves. And they're all bowing, not in worship, but in submission, in humility. And he said, meaning Esau, and he said, what meanest thou by all this drove which I have met? And he's like, why are y'all coming out? I'm coming to this town. Why are y'all coming out here? Why did you meet me here instead of me just coming to your home, And he said, these are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. Now, this is Jacob. Jacob said he did this to find grace in the sight of his brother Esau, who he's calling his Lord. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep that thou hast to thyself. And Jacob said, Nay, I pray thee, now if I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my presence at my hand. For therefore I have seen thy face as though I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me. Now, a person could just randomly turn to that verse and say, Jacob was an idolater. He worshipped his brother. You know, earlier in the couple verses before, you see him and his entire family bowing to this Esau. So Jacob was a pagan idolater, or whatever people could say. That's not what's going on here. And this is a bit of a tangent, but it just kind of shows how the uses of words can vary. Just like in our language, we have words that we use in different ways. But like the whole bowing down, and he says, I've seen your face as though I've seen the face of God. Basically, as one of authority, I'm as a complete authority over me. So basically, earlier he calls himself Esau's slave, and he says that Esau, right here, he says that Esau, he sees Esau's face like the face of God. So basically, Jacob, so one could say, Jacob was a slave of Esau because he called himself a slave and he worshiped his slave master. But that's not what's going on here at all. You read the context, that's not what's going on here at all. And that's why context is important. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not scriptures that don't talk about forced labor, because there are scriptures that talk about forced labor. However, it is important to understand what you're reading. So let's continue. Verse 11, take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. Now, to be honest here, I have no idea which one. I think this is Esau telling Jacob, no, I have enough already, so you take some of my people, some of my servants, and that sort of thing. I believe that's what this is saying. Honestly, I don't know 100% because it just keeps saying he instead of putting their name there. Verse 12, and he said, let us take our journey and let us go, and I will go before thee. That is Esau saying, based on what it says in verse 13, I'm assuming it's Esau. And in verse 13, it says, and he said unto him, my Lord knoweth that the children are tender, and the flocks and herds and young are with me. And if men should overdrive them one day, all the flock will die. So Jacob is still calling his brother Esau my Lord. And he's saying, well, it's not safe for all of us to go travel because we're kind of vulnerable. So 33:14, Jacob says, let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children are able to endure until I come into my Lord unto Seir. So Jacob is saying, let me, I pray thee, he's saying, well, Esau, you go ahead beyond me, and I'll lead on softly. I'll go slow. Like, you go ahead with your marching men or whatever. You can travel faster than me. You go ahead, and we'll just go at a slow pace as much as my people and our animals can handle. And Esau says, let me now leave. Let me now leave with thee some of the folk that are with me. And he said, what needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. So, Esau was like, okay, well, let me leave you some of my workers, my servants, my slaves. That's what the reference is to. And Jacob says he doesn't really need it. He says he doesn't really need it. So Esau returned that day on his way unto Seir. And Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built him a house and made booths for his cattle. Therefore, the name of the place is called Succoth. So basically, they kind of passed along each other. They met, and Jacob went one way and Esau went another way. And not just him, but like their whole entire entourage, family, animals, servants, everything. Basically, the point of me sharing this passage is just the usage of the word slave, because that is literally the word that he uses in verse 5, and then I think he uses it again later, you know. And basically, he's not a slave to Esau at all. He's not, at least not in the way that we think of this master. Like this whole thing, again, like someone can twist it and say, Esau is a slave master and Jacob is the slave and Jacob is worshiping the slave master. But neither one of them, like, that's not what's happening here. That is, it's a different time and a different culture. There's two whammies right there. You know, it's bad enough sometimes understanding stuff from a different culture, or it can be weird enough trying to look at things from a different time. But this is a different time and a different culture. So, this is just one example of the usage of the word slave. It is used in it as a form of respect and submission, not in submission in the sense of I'm going to let myself get beaten and whipped, but in the submission of it's just recognized as submission. Jacob is submitting to Esau. He's acknowledging, like, there's not going to be any contention between me and you. You got your squad, I got my squad. It ain't nothing going to go down. You got the crown. You on top. I'm showing you respect. But again, someone could just turn to this and just turn it into something totally different. So that's just one of the uses of the word slave in the Bible that I wanted to look at. There was a million. There's so many scriptures where I can go to, but I wanted to try to pick the biggest range of examples that show the difference. Next, we're going to look at Joseph in Egypt.